Maya's hands didn't shake. It was a muscle memory she thought she'd buried under years of cleaning shifts and quiet anonymity. But as she stared at the man bleeding out onto her scuffed linoleum, the cold, clinical clarity of a trauma surgeon took hold. The kitchen table, usually the site of Luna's finger painting and Sophia's late-night tea, had become a makeshift operating theater. She had shoved the salt shakers and a bowl of ripening fruit to the floor, replacing them with a bottle of high-proof vodka, a sewing kit, and a pair of long-nosed pliers she'd boiled in a pot of water. In the small living room, the thin wall offered little protection from the reality of the situation, but Abuela Sofia was a veteran of harder times. Maya could hear the elder woman's low, melodic voice humming a folk song, punctuated by the occasional chime of a toy piano as she kept Luna occupied. "Is the man going to be okay, Abuela?" Luna's voice was small, filtered through the wood and plaster. "Your mama is a miracle worker, mi vida," Sofia replied, her voice steady enough to be a lie or a prayer. "She just needs to fix his broken pieces. Let's finish this drawing for him, okay? He'll want to see something beautiful when he wakes up." Maya tuned them out, focusing entirely on the charcoal-suited man. Kane Moretti was ghostly pale, his groomed beard matted with roadside grit and dark, drying blood. Every breath he took was a rattling struggle, a sign that his lung was likely collapsing under the pressure of internal bleeding. She didn't have a chest tube. She didn't have a local anesthetic. All she had was a sterilized steak knife and a plastic straw she grabbed from the fast food bag in the trash. "I'm sorry," she whispered to his unconscious form, though she knew he couldn't hear her. She poured the vodka over the knife and then over his shoulder, the sharp scent of alcohol stinging her nostrils. With a steady hand, she made the incision between his ribs. A hiss of trapped air and a spray of dark blood followed. Maya didn't flinch. She inserted the straw, creating a crude but effective vent. Kane's chest hitched, his body arching instinctively against the table, a low groan vibrating in his throat. "Sophia, he's moving," Maya called out, her voice a sharp command. The door creaked open just an inch. Sophia didn't look at the gore, she looked only at Maya. Luna is wearing her headphones, watching a cartoon. "Tell me what you need." "I need you to hold his shoulders. If he thrashes while I'm stitching the artery, I'll nick the nerve and he'll lose the arm, or worse." Sophia moved with a grim efficiency, leaning her weight onto Kane's upper body. Her weathered hands, usually so gentle, were like iron clamps. Maya turned her attention to the deep puncture wound near his collarbone. It was a clean entry, likely a small caliber round, but it had shredded the soft tissue beneath. Using the sewing needle and a heavy-duty silk thread, Maya began the painstaking work of closing the internal damage. Each stitch was a battle against the slickness of the blood and the ticking clock of his fading pulse. As she worked, she couldn't help but notice the quality of him, the fine silk of his shirt, now ruined, and the heavy gold watch that spoke of a world she had no business touching. This was a man of the shadows, a king of the dark heart of Chicago. Saving him was an act of mercy that felt like a death sentence. If Rocco Vallo's men found him here, they wouldn't just finish the job on Kane, they would erase the witnesses. The minutes stretched into an hour. Maya's back ached, a dull echo of the slab of stone pain she used to feel after double shifts at the casino. Finally, she pulled the last knot tight on his skin. She cleaned the area with the remaining vodka and taped a clean dish towel over the wound. Her breath hitched as she realized she had been holding it for far too long. Kane's breathing had leveled out. It wasn't perfect, but it was rhythmic. The color was slowly creeping back into his lips. Maya slumped into a kitchen chair, her hands finally beginning to tremble as the adrenaline ebbed away. She looked down at her cardigan, now stained beyond repair, and then at Sophia. "He's stable," Maya whispered, the words feeling heavy in her mouth. Sophia let go of his shoulders and wiped a bead of sweat from her own forehead. She looked at the man on the table, the devil they had brought into their sanctuary. He is a powerful man, Maya. Men like this, they don't forget a debt. But they also bring the storm with them. I know, Maya said, glancing toward the living room door where her daughter waited. She thought of Luna's words on the roadside, "My mom is going to save you." She had fulfilled the promise her daughter had made to a stranger, but as she looked at the beautiful, dangerous man on her table, she wondered if she had saved their lives or traded them for something far more volatile. Outside, the Chicago wind continued to howl against the window pane, a reminder that the world of luxury and violence was only a heartbeat away. For now, the kitchen was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft, rhythmic sound of a Mafia boss breathing because a ghost had pulled him back from the edge. The heavy, metallic scent of antiseptic and old blood still hung in the air of the small kitchen, though Maya had scrubbed the linoleum floors twice while the man on her table slept. Kane Moretti did not wake slowly. He returned to the world all at once, his body jolting against the makeshift bed as his eyes snapped open. His first instinct was violence. Even weakened, his hand shot out, grasping Maya's wrist with a bruising strength as she reached for his pulse. His breath came in shallow, jagged hitches, his dark eyes wide and wild, scanning the unfamiliar ceiling, the mismatched kitchen cabinets, and finally, the woman standing over him. "Where?" he rasped, the single syllable tearing at his throat like broken glass. He tried to sit up, but the sharp flare of pain from the vent in his chest pinned him back down. He groaned, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that seemed out of place coming from a man who looked like he could command an army. "Don't move," Maya commanded, her voice vibrating with a professional coldness she didn't entirely feel. She didn't pull her wrist away. She met his predatory gaze with a steady, unblinking stare. "You have a punctured lung and a makeshift chest tube held together by a prayer and a plastic straw. If you tear those stitches, you'll be dead before you hit the floor." Kane's grip didn't slacken, but the immediate lethal intent in his eyes flickered. He looked down at the blood-stained dish towel taped to his chest, and then back at her. He was a man used to being the hunter, never the prey, and certainly never the patient. His mind was clearly racing, cataloging his surroundings, looking for a weapon, an exit, or a threat. "Who are you?" "I'm the person who didn't let you die on the side of the road," Maya said, finally prying her arm back. "And this is my kitchen. You're safe for now, but only if you stay still." The tension in the room was a physical weight, thick enough to choke on. Kane was a lion in a cage, even if the cage was made of floral wallpaper and the scent of Abuela Sophia's cinnamon rolls. He began to struggle again, his muscles bunching as he tried to force his body to obey his will. He didn't trust the silence. He didn't trust the woman. In his world, a helping hand was usually holding a knife. The door to the living room creaked open, a tiny sliver of light spilling across the linoleum. Maya froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had told Luna to stay with Sophia, but the girl's curiosity was a force of nature. Luna stepped into the kitchen, her white sneakers silent on the floor. In her hands, she clutched a piece of construction paper covered in bright, chaotic scribbles of yellow and blue. Kane's head whipped toward the sound, his jaw tightening as if preparing for a new assailant. But when he saw the small girl, the lethal edge in his expression faltered. He stared at her, uncomprehending. Luna didn't look afraid. She walked right up to the edge of the table, her eyes wide with a gentle, uncomplicated concern. "Hello, sir," Luna whispered. She didn't flinch at the sight of his bandages or the dark shadows under his eyes. She reached up and placed her drawing on his stomach, right over the edge of the blanket Maya had draped over his legs. "This is for you. It's a sun, so you don't feel cold anymore." The silence that followed was absolute. Kane Moretti, the man the entire city feared, looked down at the crude drawing of a yellow sun. His fingers, still stained with the grit of the roadside, twitched toward the paper but didn't touch it. He looked at Luna as if she were a creature from another planet, something too soft and too good for the world he inhabited. The jagged, defensive armor he had worn since the moment he woke up seemed to crack. She was there, Kane murmured, his voice losing its raspy edge. He remembered the blur of the roadside, the taste of copper, and the small, high-pitched voice telling him not to cry. "I told you," Luna said with the absolute certainty of a 5-year-old. "My mom saved you. She's the best doctor in the whole world, even if she has to be a ghost now." Maya moved to scoop Luna up, her eyes starting to Kane to gauge his reaction to the word doctor. But Kane wasn't looking at Maya. He was still looking at the drawing, and for the first time, his breathing began to slow, the frantic rhythm of his heart finally finding a steady pace. The suspicion didn't vanish. Men like Kane Moretti never truly stopped looking for the trap, but the immediate, murderous impulse had been quieted by a child's simple gift. "Thank you, little one," Kane said, the words heavy and foreign on his tongue. He closed his eyes, his head falling back against the pillow as the exhaustion of his injuries finally overrode his paranoia. Maya stood in the center of her kitchen, holding her daughter and watching the most dangerous man in Chicago fall back into a fitful sleep. She looked at the drawing of the sun resting on his chest. She had saved his life, but Luna had managed to do something far more difficult. She had reached the man buried beneath the monster. Maya knew the storm was still coming, that Rocco Vallo's men were likely already carving a path through the city toward them, but for this one moment, the lion was quiet, gentled by the very innocence she was so desperate to protect. The tension in the cramped apartment was as thick as the humid Chicago air. While Kane Moretti slept fitfully in the back room, his body a map of stitches and bruised pride, the world outside was quickly becoming a cage. Maya sat at the small kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, her eyes glued to the flickering screen of a second-hand television. The morning news was no longer a background hum, it had become a siren song of impending danger. Rocco Vallo's face dominated the broadcast, a sharp-featured man with predatory eyes that seemed to look right through the lens and into Maya's living room. The news anchor spoke in hushed, urgent tones about a power vacuum in the city's underworld following a suspicious vehicular accident on the south side. To the public, it was a tragedy. To Maya, it was a hunt. Rocco wasn't just taking over the syndicate, he was scouring the city for the ghost he had failed to kill. A low, rhythmic rumble from the street below pulled Maya to the window. She pulled the thin, floral curtain back just a fraction of an inch. 2 black SUVs, polished to a mirror finish that looked alien against the crumbling brickwork of her neighborhood, crawled down the narrow street. They moved with a slow, deliberate arrogance. Men in tailored dark overcoats leaned out of the windows, their gazes scanning every doorway, every alleyway, and every face that dared to be outside at this hour. "Mommy?" Luna's voice was a soft whisper from the hallway. She was clutching her tattered teddy bear, her eyes wide with a reflected anxiety she didn't fully understand. "The black cars are back. They look like the ones from the casino basement." Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She knelt down, forcing a calm she didn't feel into her voice. "It's okay, Luna. They're just looking for someone. We're going to be very quiet today, like we're playing a game of hide-and-seek, okay?" The little girl nodded solemnly, but her eyes kept drifting to the door. In the back room, a muffled groan told Maya that the lion was awake and likely feeling the encroaching pressure. The hunters were no longer in the distance. They were on her street, breathing the same city air, and the fragile sanctuary she had built was beginning to feel like a trap. Every creak of the floorboards and every shout from the alleyway felt like the moment the door would finally splinter under a heavy boot. The search had begun in earnest, and Maya Cruz, a woman who had spent 5 years perfecting the art of being invisible, knew that the shadows were no longer enough to hide them. The small apartment felt smaller as the night deepened, the walls closing in with the weight of the secrets they now held. In the living room, Abuela Sofia and Luna had long since succumbed to sleep, their steady, rhythmic breathing a stark contrast to the electric tension hummed through the kitchen. Maya stood by the sink, her fingers tracing the rim of a sterile basin. It was time for the late-night dressing change, a task that had become a silent ritual between her and the man who should have been her enemy, but was rapidly becoming something else entirely. She entered the back room, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and the faint, musky undertone of Kane's cologne that seemed to cling to the very fabric of the borrowed sheets. He was awake, sitting propped up against a mountain of pillows, his dark eyes watching her every move with an intensity that made the hair on her arms stand up. The defensive, predatory edge he'd carried since waking had softened into something more complex, a quiet, watchful curiosity. He didn't look like a king of the underworld tonight. He looked like a man tethered to the earth by the thin silk threads Maya had stitched into his skin. "It's time," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Kane nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving hers as he reached up to unbutton the spare shirt Maya had found for him. His movements were stiff, careful not to aggravate the healing tissue. As the fabric fell away, the harsh glare of the single overhead bulb illuminated the work Maya had done. The bruising was a deep, mottled purple, but the incision site was clean, free of the angry redness of infection. Maya knelt beside the bed, her hands steady as she began to peel back the old bandages. She moved with the efficient grace of the paramedic she used to be, but as her fingers brushed against the warmth of his skin, a jolt of awareness raced through her. It was the first time she had really looked at him, not as a trauma case, not as a threat, but as a man. He was built of hard angles and hidden scars, a testament to a life lived in a world where peace was a fantasy. The room was silent, save for the soft rasp of gauze against skin. As she reached around his shoulder to secure a fresh dressing, her face was inches from his. She could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the sharp tang of the vodka she'd used for sterilization, mixed with the salt of his skin. When she looked up, she found him staring at her with an expression that made her breath catch. There was no menace there, only a raw, unfiltered vulnerability that felt like a confession. "You have very steady hands, Maya Cruz," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in her chest. "I had a good teacher," she replied, her own voice trembling slightly as she focused on the tape. "Your daughter said you were a doctor. A miracle worker." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers before finally settling on her forearm. His touch was light, almost tentative, as if he were afraid he might break the spell of the moment. "Why are you scrubbing floors in a place like the Black Diamond?" Maya froze, the old pain flaring up behind her ribs. She didn't want to tell him about the night the sirens didn't come fast enough, or the way the system had chewed her up and spit her out when she tried to do the right thing. But looking at him now, seeing the way he was looking at her, not as a ghost, not as a janitor, but as a savior, the words felt ready to spill out. "Because ghosts don't get sued," she whispered, a bitter smile touching her lips. "And ghosts don't have to worry about the people they couldn't save." Kane's thumb traced a slow, deliberate circle on the inside of her wrist, right over the racing pulse she couldn't hide. "I don't think you're a ghost. I think you're the only real thing I've seen in a very long time." The air between them seemed to vanish, replaced by a magnetic pull that was impossible to ignore. In the silence of the Chicago night, with the hunters of Rocco Vallo prowling the streets just blocks away, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his skin, the depth of his gaze, and the terrifying realization that Maya had saved a man who might just be the end of the quiet life she'd fought so hard to build. She reached up, her fingers grazing the line of his jaw, tracing the rough stubble of his beard. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as a long, shuddering breath escaped him. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was a surrender, a quiet intimacy born in the wreckage of their lives. In that moment, Maya Cruz wasn't just a mother or a survivor. She was a woman seen, and Kane Moretti was no longer a monster, but a man finding his way back to the light. The afternoon sun struggled to penetrate the grime of the south side apartment windows, casting long, sickly shadows across the linoleum. Maya was in the small kitchen, her back to the hallway, trying to focus on the simple task of slicing an apple for Luna. Her mind, however, was elsewhere, fixated on the rhythmic, heavy breathing coming from the back room and the memory of the black SUVs that had patrolled their street only hours before. The silence of the apartment was brittle, a thin sheet of ice ready to shatter at the slightest vibration. The shatter came in the form of 3 sharp, aggressive knocks on the front door. Maya froze, the knife halfway through the fruit. Behind her, the door to the back room creaked. She didn't have to turn around to know Kane was there. Despite his injuries, he moved with the silent, predatory grace of a man who had spent his life expecting an ambush. When she finally glanced back, she saw him pressed against the doorframe, his charcoal suit jacket discarded to reveal the bandages beneath his white shirt. In his right hand, he gripped the heavy steak knife Maya had used for his surgery, his knuckles white, his eyes dark with a lethal, focused intent. "Get back," Kane rasped, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. He began to edge toward the door, his gaze fixed on the wood as if he could see through it. "No," Maya whispered, dropping the apple and moving to intercept him. She put her hand on his chest, feeling the frantic, powerful thrum of his heart against her palm. "You can't. If you kill someone in this hallway, we're all dead. Luna is right there." Another series of knocks followed, louder this time, accompanied by a muffled voice. "Delivery for 3B. I need a signature." Kane didn't slacken his grip. "There is no delivery, Maya. That's a scout. I know the tone. Move aside." "Wait," Maya commanded, her voice dropping to a low, authoritative frequency. She looked at him, pleading with her eyes for him to trust her. "If it's a scout, he's looking for a reason to come in. Give me the knife." For a heartbeat, Kane looked ready to shove her aside. The instinct to strike first was etched into every line of his face. But as Maya held his gaze, refusing to flinch, the raw violence in his expression flickered. He looked toward the living room where Luna sat on the floor, her small shoulders hunched in sudden fear, and then back at Maya. Slowly, almost painfully, he pressed the hilt of the knife into her hand. "Hide," she mouthed. Kane retreated into the shadows of the hallway, a dark specter waiting to strike if the ruse failed. Maya took a deep, steadying breath, smoothed her gray cardigan, and ruffled her hair to look like a tired, harried mother. She opened the door just a few inches, kept the chain on, and let out a sharp, annoyed sigh. A man stood in the dim hallway, wearing a generic blue cap pulled low. He held a small, empty-looking box and a digital clipboard, but his eyes weren't on the package. They were darting past Maya's shoulder, trying to peer into the depths of the apartment. "I didn't order anything," Maya snapped, her voice high and irritated. "And you woke up my daughter." She finally just stopped crying. The man leaned in, his gaze lingering on a dark smudge on the floor, the remains of the apple Maya had dropped, which in the dim light could have been mistaken for something else. "Company said 3B. Name's Cruz, right? Just need a signature." "No, it's not Cruz." "You've got the wrong floor," Maya lied, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could see it through her shirt. She began to close the door. "Try the 4th floor." And stop banging on doors. People are trying to live here. The delivery man put a hand out to catch the door, his eyes narrowing. You sure? Looks like you got a lot of activity in there for a quiet afternoon. From the shadows behind her, Maya heard the faint, metallic click of Kane shifting his weight. She knew he was seconds away from lunging. I have a 5-year-old and a grandmother with a broken hip, she barked, stepping into the man's line of sight to block the hallway. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. They don't patrol here often, but they love an excuse to harass delivery guys. Move. She slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt, leaning her forehead against the wood. She listened as the man's footsteps retreated down the concrete stairs. Only when the heavy building door downstairs slammed shut did she let out her breath. She turned to find Kane standing inches away. He hadn't put the knife down. He had retrieved another from the counter. He looked at her, his expression a mixture of grudging respect and lingering adrenaline. He'll be back, Kane said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. He didn't believe you. Maybe, Maya whispered, her hands finally beginning to shake. But for now, there isn't a body in my hallway, and the police aren't at the door. I saved you again, Kane. Now you have to promise me you'll keep that knife in the kitchen. Kane looked down at the blade, then back at the woman who had just lied to a professional killer without blinking. He didn't promise, but he set the knife on the table. The near miss had changed the air in the room. The hunt was no longer outside. It was at the door, and the ghost and the lion were now irrevocably bound by the lie they were both living. The low hum of the refrigerator in the small kitchen seemed louder as the apartment fell into a heavy silence, following the departure of the suspicious visitor. Maya remained leaned against the door, her heart hammering against her ribs, while Kane stood in the hallway's shadows, his knuckles white as he gripped the hilt of the kitchen knife. For several minutes, neither spoke, the only sound the distant siren of a police cruiser that never seemed to stop in this part of the South Side. Finally, Kane stepped forward, the lethal tension in his shoulders refusing to slacken as he looked at the woman who had just lied to a professional hitman to save his life. You should have let me take him, Kane murmured, his voice a low vibration that carried the weight of his dark world. Maya turned, her eyes bright with a mixture of terror and an old, simmering anger that she had kept buried for 5 long years. She didn't look like a janitor in that moment. She looked like someone who had walked through hell and learned to fight back in the only way she knew how. And then what? She asked, her voice trembling but sharp. Do you think Rocco Vallo would just stop because one scout went missing? You would have left a body in my home, Kane. You would have given them a reason to burn this whole building down with Luna inside. The mention of her daughter seemed to act like a physical barrier between them, a reminder of the innocence Maya was desperate to protect in a city ruled by devils. Kane let the knife clatter onto the small table, the sound jarring in the quiet room. He watched her as she began to pace the narrow kitchen, her movements restless and jagged. He had seen many people break under the pressure of the underworld, but Maya Cruz was different. She wasn't breaking. She was revealing the steel underneath the ghost she claimed to be. Your daughter called you a doctor, he said quietly, his gaze pinning her in place. She said you were the best in the world until you became a ghost. Why is an elite trauma surgeon hiding in the slums of Chicago, scrubbing blood off marble floors at 3 a.m? Maya stopped, her back to him as she stared out the grime-streaked window at the forgotten land below. The truth felt like a heavy stone she had been carrying for too long, one that was finally crushing her spine. I wasn't a surgeon, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind that cut through the poorly insulated walls like a blade. I was a paramedic, one of the best in the city's roughest district. I lived for the sirens, for the moments when a life was literally held together by my hands. She turned to face him, her face pale in the flickering light of the single overhead bulb. 5 years ago, I responded to a call, a shooting in a territory owned by men like you. The victim was a young man, just a kid, really, who had been caught in the crossfire of a syndicate war. I was stabilizing him when a group of men arrived, demanding I leave him to bleed out because he was a witness they couldn't afford to let live. Maya's hands curled into fists at her sides, her cracked skin a testament to the hard labor she now endured. I refused, she continued, the words coming faster now, a torrent of long-suppressed trauma. I told them I had a duty to my patient. I managed to get him into the ambulance, but they followed us. They ran us off the road, the same kind of crash Luna found you in. My partner didn't survive. The boy didn't survive. And when I woke up in the hospital, I found out the men who did it were connected to the police, to the city's power players. They didn't just kill my patient, they killed my career. They made sure my license was revoked, branded me as negligent, and told me that if I ever tried to practice medicine again, or if I ever told the truth, they would find me. She looked at Kane, her eyes filled with a raw, unprotected vulnerability. I was pregnant with Luna, desperate and alone. I had no insurance, no money, and no one would take me in. I collapsed in front of Abuela Carmen's door, and she was the only one who didn't look at me with contempt. I became a ghost to stay alive, Kane. I traded my stethoscope for a mop because ghosts don't get noticed, and ghosts can keep their daughters safe from the devils that rule the city. Kane remained silent for a long time, the weight of her confession settling between them. He had lived his life as one of those devils, reaping the night's excess, while people like Val, Maya, cleaned up the ruins. He looked at the drawing of the sun Luna had given him, still resting on the table, a fragile piece of hope in a world of shadows. For the first time, the Mafia boss didn't see a tool or a savior. He saw a woman who had sacrificed everything for a morality his world insisted on discarding. I am the man the entire city fears, Kane said, his voice dropping to a low, solemn frequency. But I have never met anyone as brave as the woman who stood at that door today. You aren't a ghost, Maya Cruz. You are the light this city tried to put out. In the quiet of the apartment, as the hunt outside continued, a new and dangerous understanding was born, a connection that forever changed the fate of them all. The fragile peace within the apartment shattered not with a gunshot, but with the heavy, rhythmic thumping of a radiator that had finally decided to quit against the Chicago winter. Maya sat at the kitchen table, her eyes red-rimmed from another night of fractured sleep, watching the steam rise from a cup of tea Sophia had pressed into her hands. Across the room, Kane was seated on the edge of the sofa, his charcoal suit jacket draped over a chair, revealing the stark white bandages beneath his shirt that Maya had meticulously changed just hours before. He looked stronger now, the lethal alertness in his eyes returning as his body healed, yet there was a new softness in the way he watched Luna playing silently with a set of wooden blocks near his feet. The shift in the atmosphere happened in an instant. Abuela Sofia, who had gone down to the building's small communal laundry room, returned with her face drained of its usual warmth. She didn't speak immediately, she simply bolted the door behind her with a trembling hand and leaned her weight against the wood. Maya stood up, the chair screeching against the linoleum, her heart already beginning the familiar, frantic drumbeat of panic. Sophia? What happened? Maya whispered, her voice tight with the instinct to protect Luna. Sophia's eyes darted toward Kane, then back to Maya, her aged eyes filled with a deep, haunting regret. I saw him, Maya. Old Mr. Henderson from the 5th floor. He's always been desperate for money, always looking for a way out of this neighborhood. She took a shuddering breath, her fingers twisting the fabric of her apron. He was at the payphone by the alley. I heard him, Maya. He was talking to someone, describing a man. A handsome man with a beard and a suit worth more than this building. He mentioned the girl. He mentioned you. The silence that followed was absolute, a suffocating vacuum that seemed to suck the air from the room. Kane was on his feet before Sophia had even finished her sentence, his movements fluid and dangerous, the vulnerability of the previous night replaced by a cold, tactical precision. He reached for the heavy kitchen knife on the counter, his knuckles white. "He's a contact for the Volo Syndicate," Kane rasped, his voice a low, predatory growl. "The low-level informants stay in these buildings for years, waiting for a payout like this. Rocco doesn't just pay for information, he pays for results." He looked at Maya, his gaze hard and uncompromising. "They're coming. And they won't come just to talk." Maya felt the floor tilt beneath her. Everything she had worked for, the 5 years of being a ghost, the safety she had painstakingly built for Luna, was evaporating in the wake of a neighbor's greed. She looked at Luna, who was now staring up at them, her small face mirroring their terror. The devils that ruled the city were no longer a distant threat, they had been invited to her doorstep. "We have to leave," Maya said, her voice cracking before she steadied it with the authority of the paramedic she used to be. "Sophia, get your coat. Pack only what you can carry in a minute. Luna, grab your bear." "No." The betrayal felt like a physical blow, a reminder that in the South Side, the law was a luxury and survival often meant selling out the person next to you. As they scrambled to gather their lives into a few frayed bags, the sound of a heavy vehicle idling in the street below reached them, a low, rhythmic thrumming that matched the fear in Maya's chest. The hunt had found them, and the improbable salvation she had found in saving Kane Moretti was about to be put to the ultimate, bloody test. The first gunshot didn't sound like a movie. It was a flat, ugly crack that shattered the morning silence and the cheap wood of the front door simultaneously. Maya didn't scream. She moved with a jagged, survivalist speed she hadn't felt in 5 years, throwing herself across the small living room to shield Luna. The little girl was frozen, clutching her tattered teddy bear as plaster dust rained down like gray snow. "Under the table, Luna." "No. Don't you dare come out." Maya's voice was a harsh whip, leaving no room for argument. Kane Moretti was already a shadow in motion. The vulnerability that had defined him in the kitchen table clinic was gone, replaced by the lethal, cold-eyed king the city feared. He didn't have his custom-tailored weapons or a crew of enforcers. He had a heavy iron skillet in one hand and a sharpened steak knife in the other. He pressed himself against the wall beside the splintering door, his breathing shallow but controlled, his dark eyes fixed on the doorframe. "Get Sophia to the bathroom," Kane commanded, his voice a low, predatory growl. "Bolt the door and stay low. If they get past me, you run for the fire escape." Maya grabbed Abuela Sophia's hand, dragging the older woman toward the back of the apartment just as the door burst inward under the weight of a heavy boot. 2 men in dark tactical gear flooded the small space, their silenced weapons spitting lines of lead that shredded the floral sofa and shattered the framed drawings Luna had made for the injured man. The fight was a chaotic blur of close-quarters desperation. Kane didn't wait for them to find their footing. He moved like a coiled spring, swinging the iron skillet with a bone-crunching impact against the side of the first gunman's head. As the man crumpled, Kane was already on the second, the steak knife finding a seam in the tactical vest. It was a brutal, ugly dance of survival, performed in a space meant for bedtime stories and shared meals. Maya watched from the hallway, her paramedic instincts warring with her terror. She saw Kane take a grazing shot to the shoulder, the same shoulder she had just stitched back together. Blood bloomed across his white shirt, a fresh crimson stain joining the old ones. He didn't flinch. He disarmed the second man with a ruthless efficiency that made Maya's blood run cold, turning the captured weapon back toward the doorway just as 3 more hitmen stepped into the hall. "Maya, go!" Kane roared, the sound echoing off the peeling wallpaper. The apartment, once a sanctuary for ghosts, had become a kill zone. The air was thick with the scent of cordite and the sour smell of fear. Rocco Volo's hitmen were no longer scouts. They were a cleanup crew, and they didn't care about collateral damage. A stray round shattered the mirror in the hallway, sending shards of glass flying like diamonds. Maya pushed Sophia into the bathroom and turned back, her eyes meeting Kane's across the wreckage of her life. In that moment of absolute violence, there was an unmistakable spark of something else, a fierce, protective bond that had been forged in the darkest shadows of the city. Kane wasn't just fighting for his empire anymore. He was fighting for the woman who had pulled him back from the edge and the little girl who had given him a drawing of the sun. "I'm not leaving you," Maya shouted back, her voice ringing with a defiance she hadn't felt since she was a doctor. She grabbed a heavy ceramic lamp, her knuckles white. She was a ghost no longer. The siege of Apartment 3B was the moment the world insisted on discarding finally fought back. As the sounds of sirens began to wail in the distance, the first time the police had bothered to patrol this forgotten land in years, Maya and Kane stood together in the ruins, a fallen king and a ghost medic, holding the line against the devils who had come to claim them. The improbable salvation they had found in each other was now the only thing standing between them and the dark heart of Chicago. The iron-scented air of the apartment was finally beginning to clear, replaced by the clinical, cold scent of expensive cologne and the ozone of high-end electronics. The forgotten land of the South Side remained outside the window, but for Maya Cruz, it felt worlds away. The siege was over. Rocco Vallo was no longer a name whispered in terror. He had become a footnote in the bloody history of Chicago's underworld, eliminated with a surgical precision that only a man like Kane Moretti could command once he regained his throne. Maya stood in the center of her small living room, her hands tucked into the pockets of her worn gray cardigan. Around her, men in silent, tailored suits, the real enforcers of the Moretti Empire, were efficiently packing the few belongings she and Luna owned. They moved with a respectful silence, a stark contrast to the devils who had kicked in her door only days before. Kane stood by the window, his silhouette tall and imposing against the gray city sky. He was no longer the broken man on her kitchen table. The charcoal suit he wore now was pristine, the white shirt beneath it hiding the scars of Maya's handiwork. "You don't have to do this, Kane," Maya said, her voice steady but soft. "We were ghosts before. We can be ghosts again. You've given us enough by just making sure Rocco is gone." Kane turned, and the coldness that usually defined his gaze vanished the moment it landed on her. He walked across the scuffed linoleum, stopping only when he was close enough for Maya to feel the familiar, magnetic heat radiating from him. He reached out, his hand hesitating before gently cupping her jaw. His thumb traced the faint bruise on her cheek, a lingering mark from the battle they had fought together. "You saved a man the world wanted dead, Maya," Kane murmured, his voice a low, resonant vibration. "You gave me back my life, and Luna gave me back my soul. Do you really think I'm going to let the two most important people in this city go back to scrubbing floors and hiding in the shadows?" From the hallway, Luna appeared, her eyes wide as she watched a man in a suit carefully pack her tattered teddy bear into a velvet-lined case. She ran to Kane, wrapping her arms around his leg. The Mafia boss didn't flinch. Instead, he reached down and lifted her into his arms with a practiced ease that suggested he had spent the last 48 hours doing little else. "Are we going to the castle now, Mr. Kane?" Luna asked, her voice bright with a child's uncomplicated hope. Kane looked at Maya, an unspoken question in his eyes, a plea for a second chance that didn't involve violence or fear. "It's not a castle, little one," he said, his gaze fixed on Maya. "It's a home. A place where your mom can be a doctor again, and where no one will ever look at either of you with contempt. A place where you'll never have to be invisible ghosts again." Maya looked around her small, crumbling sanctuary one last time. She thought of Abuela Sofia, who was already settled into a beautiful estate in the suburbs, safe and cared for. She thought of the 5 years she had spent cleaning up the ruins of other people's excess. Then she looked at Kane, a man who was a monster to the world, but who had become a protector to her. She saw the redemption in his eyes and the love he didn't know how to put into words. "I'm not a ghost anymore," Maya whispered, stepping into his space and resting her forehead against his shoulder. "No," Kane replied, his arm winding around her waist, pulling her and Luna into a single, unbreakable circle. "From today on, the world will know exactly who you are. You are the woman who saved the king, and you are the heart of everything I own." As they walked out of apartment 3B for the last time, the concrete stairs no longer felt like they were eating away at her life. Below, a fleet of black cars waited, but this time, they weren't there to hunt. They were there to usher a new family into the light. In the dark heart of Chicago, under the shadows of the gleaming skyscrapers, the most improbable salvation had finally bloomed, proving that even in the deepest shadows, the most powerful love stories are just waiting to be told.